He never expected to find her here, and in that quiet guest room, everything changed. He had only come to visit for a few hours, nothing more. The house was quiet when he arrived, sunlight streaming through tall windows, dust motes dancing in the air like tiny golden sparks. The scent of something familiar yet elusive lingered, lavender mixed with the subtle warmth of polished wood, and it caught him off guard. It was homey, yes, but somehow hers. He noticed her the moment he stepped in. She moved with effortless grace, her posture relaxed but undeniably poised, carrying herself as someone used to owning her space without ever needing to announce it. She was older than him by perhaps 15 or more years, but age didn't define her. There was a quiet confidence in her movements, a kind of elegance that made him instinctively pause, almost forgetting why he was there. Her hair caught the sunlight, golden streaks framing a face both strong and subtly vulnerable. Their eyes met briefly. She offered a small, polite smile that lingered just long enough to make his heart skip. He noticed the way her fingers brushed along a table edge as she passed, the slight tilt of her head as if she were assessing him with gentle curiosity. There was no overt flirtation, but something electric passed between them. A tension almost imperceptible, yet impossible to ignore. He forced himself to move forward, clearing his throat. The sound seemed too loud in the quiet house. He realized he hadn't introduced himself properly, and she chuckled softly, a sound warm and inviting, yet not indulgent. There was a subtle humor in her eyes, like she had already guessed his hesitation and found it endearing rather than awkward. As he followed her through the softly lit hallway, he felt his senses sharpening. The sunlight warmed his back, the faint smell of her perfume teased his memory, and every small detail of the house, the way the curtains fluttered, the softness of the rug underfoot, seemed heightened in his awareness. He was conscious of her presence beside him, of the faint brush when she reached for a door handle before he did. He wanted to say something, anything, but words felt inadequate. So he watched instead. The gentle curve of her shoulders, the small, almost imperceptible sigh as she paused by a window, the way her eyes softened when she looked at him. There was depth there, a quiet history, a kind of hidden vulnerability that only drew him closer, even from a distance. It was a simple, fleeting moment, but it planted a seed in him. He realized then that this encounter, unexpected, unplanned, and entirely innocent on the surface, was the beginning of something he didn't yet understand. Something that felt bigger than the house, bigger than the polite smiles and quiet gestures. He didn't know where it would lead, only that it had already changed him, in ways he couldn't yet name. And she, unaware of the storm she had stirred in him, moved through the house as though it were ordinary, leaving him suspended in the quiet electricity of that first, unforgettable glance. He hadn't meant to end up in the guest room. In fact, he was wandering the house, trying to appear casual while secretly stealing glances at her, when the door creaked open in front of him. And there she was, alone, the light from the tall window spilling across her, highlighting the quiet elegance of her movements. She was arranging something, a stack of books, maybe some papers, or perhaps a small keepsake box, and she didn't notice him at first. He paused at the threshold, his chest tightening. The air felt charged, like he had stepped into a private corner of her world he wasn't meant to see. The room smelled faintly of lavender and old wood, comforting yet intimate. For a moment, time slowed, and he noticed everything. The soft creases in her blouse, the careful way she placed each item down, the gentle exhale as if she were holding herself in check. Then she looked up. Her eyes widened ever so slightly, a flash of surprise crossing her face, quickly replaced by a composed, almost amused expression. "Oh," she said softly, a hint of laughter in her voice. "I didn't hear you come in." He stumbled over his words, trying to explain, though what was there to explain? That he hadn't meant to intrude? That he was entirely captivated by her presence? Instead, he just muttered something about looking for the bathroom, even though he knew the excuse sounded thin. There was a pause, a shared, almost sacred silence. He noticed how the sunlight caught the strands of her hair, making them gleam like copper. He saw the small, graceful gestures of her hands, the way she adjusted a pillow and then paused, holding it for just a second too long. She seemed both relaxed and self-conscious at once, a duality that drew him in deeper than he expected. As he stepped forward, he almost touched her arm. But instead, their hands brushed briefly, accidental and fleeting. The contact sent a small jolt up his spine, and he felt the warmth of her skin even in that brief encounter. Neither spoke immediately. Instead, they both lingered in the tension of that moment, aware of each other in a way words could never capture. He realized, almost painfully, how unusual this was for him. He had never felt so aware of another person in a simple, quiet moment. He noticed the curve of her shoulder, the slight arch of her brow as she studied him, and the way she let her gaze linger on him just a heartbeat too long before looking away. He could feel the undercurrent of something unspoken, something intimate, threading through the room like an invisible tether. Finally, she handed him a small notebook, their fingers brushing again. "Here," she said, her voice gentle. The contact was brief, but the sensation lingered, leaving him oddly unsteady. He thanked her, words awkward yet sincere, fully aware of the charge in the space between them. And just like that, the room felt smaller, more personal, more alive. He realized that this accidental encounter, the stumble into a private, unguarded space, had shifted everything. She was no longer just the elegant woman he had admired from afar. In that guest room, she became something more complicated, more immediate, more real. And in the quiet, golden light of that room, he sensed that nothing between them would ever be quite the same again. After the initial tension in the guest room, they settled into a quieter rhythm. He found himself lingering, not out of awkward curiosity, but out of something heavier, more magnetic. She had a way of speaking softly, yet every word seemed measured, intentional. Even when the topic was mundane, asking about his visit or commenting on the weather, the pauses between sentences carried weight, a kind of unspoken intimacy that made him lean closer without realizing it. He noticed the subtle gestures she made, small and almost unconscious. The way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gentle tilt of her head when she asked a question, the way her eyes softened when she smiled at a half-joke he made. Everything about her presence was layered, confidence shadowed by a quiet vulnerability, elegance tempered by approachable warmth. He found himself observing her not in a predatory way, but as if he were cataloging a rare moment in time he didn't want to forget. The room itself seemed to participate in their conversation. Sunlight slanted through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. The air carried the faint scent of lavender, mingling with the warmth of the late afternoon. He noticed the soft hum of the refrigerator somewhere in the background, the occasional creak of the floorboards under her feet. Each tiny sound amplified the intimacy of their proximity, making him acutely aware of her breathing, of the subtle rise and fall of her shoulders. They talked about small things at first, books she had read, his own recent projects, the familiar hum of domestic life, but gradually the conversation edged into more personal territory. He shared something about himself, a fleeting insecurity he normally kept buried, and for the first time, she didn't dismiss it. She leaned forward slightly, resting her forearm on the edge of the desk, and listened, truly listened. Her eyes held a softness that made him feel seen in a way he hadn't expected. He realized, in that quiet space, that attraction wasn't only physical. There was an emotional resonance, a connection that thrummed beneath the surface. He wanted to linger in this moment, to savor the delicate balance of closeness and hesitation, but he also felt the weight of boundaries. She was older, experienced, self-assured in ways he was not. The awareness of this difference made every glance, every brush of their hands, carry a subtle tension that neither of them had to acknowledge aloud. At one point, their knees brushed lightly as they both shifted to reach for something on the table. Neither flinched. Instead, it felt natural, almost inevitable. He caught her eyes, and for a fraction of a second, the world outside the guest room seemed to vanish. That fleeting contact, small, accidental, yet electric, left him with a dizzying mix of anticipation and reverence. By the time they parted from the conversation, the room felt charged, alive with an unspoken understanding. They had spoken of nothing monumental, yet everything important had been said in gestures, in pauses, in lingering glances. He realized that, somehow, in this quiet, ordinary room, they had crossed into something delicate and fragile. The beginnings of trust, intimacy, and the kind of emotional closeness that leaves a person forever changed. The rain began softly at first, tapping against the window in a delicate rhythm that seemed to echo the quiet intensity of the room. He was sitting across from her, both of them having drifted into a comfortable silence after their earlier conversation. Yet the air between them had shifted. It was heavier now, charged with a feeling neither wanted to name aloud. Every glance carried weight. Every small gesture felt amplified. She shifted slightly in her chair, reaching for a stack of papers on the desk, and their arms brushed. The touch was fleeting, almost accidental, but it lingered in his mind far longer than it should have. There was a warmth there, soft, understated, but it carried with it a sense of invitation, a question neither dared to speak. He realized how acutely aware he was of her. The way her hair fell across her shoulder, the slight crease in her brow when she concentrated, the gentle exhale she let out when she realized he was watching. For the first time, the conversation turned deeper, more personal. She spoke quietly about a worry she had been carrying, something that had nothing to do with him directly but made the room feel intimate nonetheless. He listened, leaning slightly forward, his hands resting lightly on the edge of the desk. He wanted to reach out, to offer comfort, but he hesitated, aware of the delicate boundary between care and overstepping. There was a pause, long enough that the only sound was the rain and the quiet creak of the floorboards as she shifted. He noticed the way her eyes softened, glistening ever so slightly, revealing vulnerability beneath her composed exterior. It struck him then that this rare, unguarded moment was more intoxicating than any fleeting physical attraction. There was depth here, a complexity that both thrilled and terrified him. He spoke carefully, choosing his words with thoughtfulness, trying to acknowledge her feelings without overstepping. She listened intently, her gaze fixed on him, and for a heartbeat, the rest of the world ceased to exist. In that shared space, emotions hung like a tangible fog, thick with unspoken longing and tentative trust. Then came the almost imperceptible gesture. She reached for a pen on the desk, and their hands collided lightly. Neither withdrew immediately. Their fingers brushed, paused, and lingered just long enough for the contact to carry significance. It was subtle, yet electrifying, a gentle acknowledgement of something deeper than friendship. His chest tightened, and he caught himself breathing a little faster, aware of the storm of emotions this simple room had unleashed. By the time the rain eased into a gentle drizzle, the tension between them had become almost unbearable. Neither had admitted anything directly, yet both knew that their connection had shifted. The unspoken desire, the quiet vulnerability, and the shared understanding of each other's presence had created a fragile intimacy that neither wanted to break. As he left the room that day, he realized that everything had changed. The guest room was no longer just a physical space. It had become a threshold, a place where emotions that had been hidden, hesitation, longing, admiration, had begun to surface. And in that quiet, rain-scented room, he understood that nothing would ever feel ordinary between them again. The next day, the house felt different. Not the structure itself. Sunlight still spilled through the same tall windows, and the faint scent of lavender lingered in the air, but the way he experienced it had changed. He noticed her more in subtle ways. The soft creak of her shoes on the hardwood, the delicate gesture of brushing her hair back from her face, the quiet hum she made as she moved around. There was a rhythm to her presence, and he found himself unconsciously attuning to it. They moved through the house together, sharing small, mundane tasks that now carried unexpected significance. A cup of tea became an intimate ritual. He watched her hands as she poured the water, the careful way she held the mug, the faint warmth radiating from it. When she handed it to him, their fingers brushed lightly, lingering for just a moment longer than necessary. It was nothing spectacular, nothing overt, but it sent a ripple through him that made him suddenly aware of every nuance of her presence. She showed him a small corner of the garden she loved, guiding him gently as they navigated around a patch of recently watered flowers. The breeze tugged at her cardigan, and he instinctively reached out, brushing it back from her shoulder. She looked at him then, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed suspended. The scent of wet earth, the soft sunlight, the quiet intimacy of the moment. All of it weaving a memory neither of them could forget. Laughter became another kind of closeness. Something trivial would happen. A book falling, a misplaced object, and she would laugh, a warm, unguarded sound that made him feel lighter, more present. He began to understand that connection wasn't only in the grand gestures or dramatic confessions. It was in the small, repeated acts of noticing and caring. Sitting side by side on the couch, she handed him a pen, their hands brushing. Setting it down, he lingered in the warmth of her proximity, aware of the subtle shift in energy between them. He also started noticing the quiet ways she allowed herself to be vulnerable with him. She would share a fleeting worry or an honest thought about her day, and he would listen, offering the kind of attention that wasn't forced or performative. Sometimes, she would catch him watching her and smile, a gentle acknowledgement that made his chest tighten. It was the intimacy of being truly seen without judgment, of existing together in moments that were entirely unremarkable yet entirely significant. Even mundane touches carried weight. Brushing a stray hair from her face, lightly touching her shoulder to guide her through the kitchen doorway, or a fleeting hand on her back as she bent to pick something up. Each small act was a conversation, a declaration, a promise that neither needed to articulate. Their connection was growing organically, silently, through shared presence and quiet attentiveness. By the end of the day, he realized how profoundly these moments had affected him. The tension of their initial encounters had softened into a gentle warmth, a trust that whispered of something deeper, something meaningful. Every glance, every brush of hands, every shared laugh was building an invisible bridge between them. He couldn't yet name what it was, but he knew with certainty that this slow, steady closeness was changing the way he saw her, the way he felt alive in her presence, and the way he understood himself in relation to her. The room was quiet that evening, lit only by the soft amber glow of a single lamp. Rain still whispered against the window, a gentle percussion that mirrored the rapid rhythm of his heart. He had spent the day with her, moving from task to task, sharing small laughs and fleeting touches, but now the air felt heavier, charged with the unspoken, the moments between words that held everything they hadn't yet dared to say. She was sitting on the edge of the sofa, knees tucked slightly inward, a posture that somehow revealed more than casual comfort. It betrayed a subtle tension, a hint of vulnerability that drew him closer. He noticed the faint crease of concern between her brows, the delicate quiver of her lips as she paused mid-thought. He wanted to reach out, to offer reassurance, but he hesitated, aware that one wrong move could shatter the fragile intimacy they had built. Finally, she spoke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just softly, almost as if she were testing the air. She admitted something personal, a worry she had kept tucked away, a fear she rarely let anyone see. His chest tightened at the honesty in her voice. It was as though she had let him into a room inside herself that no one else had access to, and the weight of that trust made him acutely aware of the space between them. He leaned forward, careful not to rush, and met her gaze. I didn't realize," he said, his voice low and measured, "how much you've carried alone." It wasn't a declaration of love yet, but the words carried an earnest vulnerability he rarely allowed himself. He wanted her to know he saw her. Not just her beauty, not just her grace, but the quiet strength and the hidden fears that made her human, made her real. She shifted slightly and their hands met. It was accidental at first, but neither pulled away. Their fingers brushed, hesitated, and then intertwined gently. The touch was tentative but deliberate, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that had been growing between them. His thumb traced the back of her hand lightly, and she didn't flinch. Instead, her gaze softened, and a small, almost imperceptible smile curved her lips. In that moment, the words they hadn't dared to speak, feelings they had skirted around, desires they had quietly acknowledged, hung in the air, palpable yet unspoken. The room seemed to shrink around them, the lamp casting warm light that softened the edges of the world outside. It was intimate, sacred, and terrifying in its intensity. He realized then that he wanted to be near her, not just for fleeting moments of proximity, but for the quiet understanding, the shared vulnerability, the emotional intimacy they had nurtured over days of small gestures and lingering glances. And as she looked at him, eyes glimmering with emotion, he understood that she felt it too. Neither of them needed to speak the words aloud. Yet, the touch, the glance, the soft, measured breathing between them said enough. The tension had reached its peak, fragile and electric, and in that quiet room, lit by amber light and the rhythm of rain, they both acknowledged the undeniable truth. What had started as accidental proximity had blossomed into something profound, something that neither time nor circumstance could ignore. By the time evening had settled into night, the house felt like a world unto itself. The rain had stopped, leaving the faint, refreshing scent of wet earth drifting through the open windows. Inside, the soft lamplight painted the room in warm amber tones, casting long, cozy shadows along the walls. The guest room, the space where everything had quietly shifted between them, felt even more intimate now, as if the room itself had witnessed the unspoken bond that had grown there. He sat near her, close enough that their shoulders brushed lightly, the contact comfortable and reassuring. Their conversation had been gentle, meandering through small topics, yet underneath each sentence was the weight of everything left unsaid, everything newly discovered. It was a calm moment after the storm of their emotions, a pause that allowed them to simply exist together without pretense or hesitation. She looked at him then, and for the first time in the night, he saw the vulnerability and quiet longing fully reflected in her eyes. There was a softness there, an openness that was both exhilarating and grounding. He reached out, resting a hand lightly on hers, feeling the warmth of her skin, the delicate tension of her fingers curling slightly around his. It was a simple touch, yet in its simplicity lay the promise of trust, connection, and care. Words weren't necessary, not yet. Instead, they allowed themselves to linger in the comfort of each other's presence. He brushed a stray lock of hair from her face, and she leaned into the touch, a subtle, unspoken acknowledgement of their closeness. The tension that had built over days of fleeting glances, light touches, and shared confidences had transformed into something steadier, deeper. A quiet intimacy that didn't need to be declared loudly to be understood. For a moment, he reflected on how far they had come. What began as a chance encounter in the guest room had evolved into something neither of them could have anticipated. The slow accumulation of small gestures, laughs shared over mundane tasks, fingers brushing during casual exchanges, evenings spent in quiet proximity, had created an emotional landscape rich with understanding and trust. He realized that the age gap, the social hesitation, and the uncertainty of timing mattered far less than the connection that had quietly grown between them. She squeezed his hand gently, her smile soft and real, and he knew that whatever path lay ahead, they had crossed a threshold together. The moment was theirs, fragile yet complete, and in its quietness was a kind of perfection. Whether they would define it as a beginning or simply treasure it as a shared chapter, it had changed them irrevocably. As he finally rose to leave the room, she followed him to the doorway. There was a pause, a lingering gaze that spoke volumes. He leaned forward instinctively, pressing a gentle kiss to her cheek. She didn't pull away. Instead, she rested her hand on his arm briefly, letting the warmth linger a moment longer. In that exchange, unspoken but deeply understood, they sealed the uncharted bond that had grown between them. He walked away from the guest room knowing two things: that the encounter had forever altered the way he saw her, and that the quiet, tender intimacy they shared would remain with him always. The guest room had been the stage for a delicate, slow-burning connection, one that had transformed a chance encounter into a memory of enduring emotional depth, leaving both of them richer, more open, and quietly, profoundly changed. If this slow burn story touched you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new romantic tale. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced a connection that changed everything in a single moment?